Hi, I'm Michelle Sakurka. The New Jersey Business and Industry Association is committed to educating the public about the important issues impacting New Jersey's businesses and economy. That's why we're proud to support the important programming produced by the Caucus Educational Corporation.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Agnes Veris NJTV studio at 2 Gateway. Funding has been provided by Bartley Healthcare, Nursing, Rehabilitation, and Assisted Living, Felician University, a 21st century education based on timeless values. The New Jersey Association of Health Underwriters, New Jersey's benefits specialist. Wells Fargo, PSE&G, committed to improving New Jersey's economy and strengthening its communities. JFK Medical Center. And by Johnson & Johnson. Promotional support provided by the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. And by NJ Biz, all business, all New Jersey.
To State of Affairs. I'm Steve Adubato, coming to you from the Agnes Veris NJTV studio here in Newark, New Jersey. It is our pleasure to welcome back again. We wish we were not even here to talk about this, but we have to. It is the state of affairs of poverty in the state with Melville D. Miller, president of Legal Services in New Jersey. D, good to see you, buddy.
Great to see you and be back with you.
What is the state of affairs when we are talking about poverty in New Jersey and in America?
And specifically in New Jersey and in America to a somewhat lesser extent, we're at 50-year record high levels, rates of poverty. This was a spike that was a result of the Great Recession. It began in 2007. And although that spike has now leveled off, it really has not gone down in any statistically significant way yet. And there are underlying reasons for that around the possibilities or lack thereof of employment that give cause for great concern.
See, but D, you know, people watching could be asking themselves, I was asking myself when I saw these numbers, wait a minute. If, in fact, the unemployment rate in New Jersey and in the country continues to go down, how could the poverty rate be going up?
Unfortunately, the unemployment rate does not fully count those people who are not working. It sounds a little bit of a paradox, but it's a well-known fact that it only counts people who have worked within a certain period of time, basically half a year. And it also doesn't count the people who have given up and just decided that...
What do you mean it doesn't count them?
It literally doesn't. It runs off of data generated by unemployment insurance for the most part. And the eligibility levels rules for that constrain what the definition is. So they just don't look at them. They just don't count them. There's no effective way for government to count them.
So we're doing this program in early March. President Trump addressed Congress. As I'm watching his speech, I'm looking for signs as to what his priorities are. What is your sense as to the Trump administration's priorities, initiatives, as it relates to those dealing with poverty?
It's hard to, I'm in no position to say what the administration thinks or intends, but from what we see, there's not a focus yet at all.
What would it
poverty.
Look like?
What they have talked about is the need to create jobs, and we have yet.
Well, that's positive.
That's an absolute positive to the extent that they follow it, but there is not any recognition that we've seen or heard that about those who cannot work because of disabilities, or those who cannot find work because the job market has changed. It's now very much not a manufacturing, low-skill kind of thing. It's high-tech, high skills.
Let's talk about the legal services of New Jersey. What is it, and how is it connected to poverty?
Legal services is the system across the state and the nation that provides lawyers for low-income people who can't afford them on their own in civil cases. There's no right to counsel in a civil case, and this is the only way that these people can get help to avoid homelessness and eviction, family breakup, and all those sorts of things.
Okay, so to what degree, and this isn't your opinion I'm looking for the facts, to what degree do government policies in the state support legal services for the protection of those who have the least ability to defend themselves, to get what it is they need for a due process in the court system?
The data shows that people with low incomes will only find lawyers in 6% of the cases that they need lawyers.
What happens? What is the state of those who can't get them in 94% of the cases?
They will face evictions. At least a third of those who will be evicted had defenses. Our studies show that would have kept them from being evicted, kept them from potentially being homeless, potentially from having their families break up. And that effect is mirrored down across the board. People will wind up adjudicated as owing money that they don't really owe because they're legitimate defenses.
Do you talk about beyond policy? I mean, this whole question of state of affairs. You know, you can be a very public policy-oriented program, but sometimes the policy gets caught up in an esoteric dialogue among policymakers, politicians, people who are removed somewhat in state capitals, national capitals. What about the lives, literally the lives of those who are living below the poverty line? Describe what those lives are truly like.
Those folks in poverty in New Jersey are isolated. They're physically isolated. They live in residential areas which are separate from those with means.
What do you mean separate?
They literally different communities, either neighborhoods through which people with means don't pass and in which they don't live. There's just very little contact. It's ships passing in the night, different worlds, and that is part of the problem.
What are their children dealing with?
The children are facing almost impossible lives in terms of trying to get education. Can you imagine if you're a family that's been evicted two times in the last year, how that child is going to be
how do they go
successful
to school?
in a school
Sorry
system?
for interrupting, Dee. So if that child is evicted from his or her home, 6-year-old, we have a 6-year-old daughter. That child, I'm thinking, a 6-year-old child is evicted with his or her family, and they move to a different community. That means they have to go to a different school.
They have a right to go still to the same school.
But how would they get there?
How would they get there? The disruption of, can you imagine suddenly having to commute 10, 15, 20
and where's
miles?
the food?
And food is an issue. The most successful safety net program is the food stamp, now called SNAP program. It's a critical program.
Is it at risk?
It's at risk of being block granted under the new proposals.
The Trump administration argues that states should get block grants and that they should be administering those programs, not the federal government.
Right. The state should figure it out.
And what's wrong with that?
History tells us that when safety net programs are block granted, as welfare was in 1996, the resources are absolutely capped at the federal level. It's limited, no more. So when you have a Great Recession, 2007, 2008, 2009, poverty goes through the roof, record levels. There's no more money to deal with them.
You're saying that some of these children potentially are at greater risk. Some of these families are at greater risk, and they would suffer exponentially more.
That's right. That's absolutely true.
Dee, I ask you this every time you're with us, with my great colleague Rafael P. Roman on this program's predecessor, Capital Report. We used to talk about this all the time.
Yep.
I'll ask you again. To what degree do you believe, big picture, hard question, as a society, to what degree do you actually believe we really care all that much about the people you're describing?
I think when we meet eyeball to eyeball another human being, we care. I have to believe that there's a human decency that reverberates. But we have, in our political ways, gotten so insulated and isolated from the realities of poverty that there's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of blame and shame, but very little concrete action, and behind it, evident concern on the part of the political system.
Thank you, Dee. Open invitation.
Great to be with you again.
Dee Miller is the president of Legal Services in New Jersey. We appreciate you joining us. Poverty in New Jersey and America. Be back on State of Affairs right after this. New Jersey voters will soon decide who will be New Jersey's next governor after Chris Christie. Now, my job is to ask the candidates the tough questions that you want answered. So follow me on Twitter at Steve Adubato and post the #1 question that you want me to ask New Jersey's next governor. We are pleased to welcome Jim Seuss, Executive Director, Council on American-Islamic Relations, New Jersey chapter. Good to see you back again, Jim.
Nice to be here.
This is your first appearance, in fact, on State of Affairs. What is the state of affairs of those who are living in this state or are trying to come to this state who happen to have a Muslim background? By the way, tell everyone exactly what the council is.
The Council on American-Islamic Relations is a civil rights organization dedicated to protecting the civil rights primarily of Muslims in America.
Okay, so take a step back. The state of those who fall into that category, particularly as it relates to the Trump administration and their policies in this regard.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of anxiety in the community right now. This executive order that enacted this travel ban has created that.
But there is no travel ban.
Right.
As we speak right now, in the beginning of March 2017, there is no travel ban. The Ninth Circuit out in San Francisco, the Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, blocked that ban.
Right. So the ban itself, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have that much of an impact right now, of course, but the administration signaled what its intent is by signing that executive order.
And by the way, excuse me, by the time this airs, there may be an amended version of that, so I don't want to date ourselves. So say they amend it.
Right.
What happens?
Well, then we have another ban, essentially. It's executive order, and there'll be some sort of flavor of what we have now.
Another court fight?
Likely.
And so what does it mean for, again, when we talk about state of affairs, it isn't just a public policy question. Right. It's for the actual people who are impacted by it. Right. Describe their lives.
Right. Everyone virtually is impacted, whether you have anything to do with those 7 countries or not.
Name those countries.
Those Iraq, Iran, Somalia, Libya, Yemen. I think I got,
Yemen, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, Libya, Iraq, and Iran. The administration is saying now if they were to do this, we don't know for sure, but they would take Iraq out. Does it make a difference?
Doesn't really make a difference. I mean, having Iraq on the list was really thoughtless. There are Iraqis who have risked their lives to help the U.S. military, and now we've told them we don't really care that you've done that. At least temporarily, we're saying all Iraqis are suspect and a potential threat to the United States, so we'll keep you out. I think for that reason, they've taken Iraq potentially off the list.
Where are these people who live in New Jersey? I mean, this is a national issue, but connect it, Jim, back to New Jersey. Where are the folks from these nations and other Muslims disproportionately in New Jersey? I know Jersey City has a large Islamic population.
Right. Well, actually, the point is that you don't have to be from one of these 7 countries to be impacted. People that have nothing to do with these 7 countries, people from Egypt, people from Pakistan, are impacted by this just by the anxiety that is created as far as international travel.
Explain that.
Well, first of all, the travel ban itself has sent a very bigoted message to the country as a whole and to Customs and Border Patrol agents.
A bigoted message. The administration argues it's simply about being safe and protecting American citizens from those who may come into our country to do harm. You're saying a bigoted message.
Right, because it's basically casting a shadow of doubt over anyone from any one of these countries. Whereas history has shown that no one from any of these countries has ever committed a terrorist act inside the United States. It's also, Trump campaigned on a Muslim ban, basically saying Muslims are dangerous people, we can't let them in. This is his way of keeping good on that ban. And I think that his constituents have seen it that way. And frankly, Customs and Border Patrol agents have seen that way. We've seen cases of, for instance, Muhammad Ali's son, who was detained for hours. He's an American citizen.
His ex-wife as well.
His ex-wife. And Olympic medalist Ibtihaj Muhammad was detained. And she grew up in New Jersey. Had nothing to do with any of those countries, has a Muslim name, but is being detained and questioned for hours.
Jim, let me ask you this. I don't want to beat this state of affairs name of the series to death, but I'm going to ask you this. What is, in fact, from your point of view, and you've been studying this issue, engaged and involved for a long time, the state of affairs between those who are Muslim and those who are not in terms of the relationships that exist or don't?
Well, there's a great deal of fear and anxiety on both sides. The Muslim community has a great deal of anxiety. based on the campaign promises that now President Trump has made and his willingness he has shown to act on those promises. And the fact that the president himself is acting on those promises has sent a signal to the people that may have already harbored fear of Muslims that this fear is actually real. He legitimizes that fear and, in fact, that hatred and bigoted acts.
But Jim, respectfully, where do you think American and New Jersey public opinion is on most of these issues? Do you believe most people are supportive of the president's initiatives in this regard?
Right, right.
Do you believe they are?
From what I understand, there's a great deal of support. About, half the people in the country tend to.
Okay, so let's devil's advocate.
Right.
Is it the job of an elected official, particularly the chief executive of this country, the leader of the free world, to in fact adhere to that public opinion if it's a little more than half, or to do something other than that?
Well, the public opinion seems to be guided by fear, and we should not govern out of fear. We should govern by the Constitution. So while the public may have an unfounded fear,
what does the Constitution have to do with this issue?
Well, the Constitution basically says that you shouldn't have any sort of religious test regarding people coming into the country or anything else. And the way this thing was written the first time, there was absolutely a religious test as far as Syrian refugees. There was a carve-out for Christians from Syria, as just one example. But right now, the effect, even though it wasn't written in the executive order, the effect is that Muslims are being discriminated against at the border, be they citizens, green card holders, or what, and having to do anything with these 7 countries or not, they're being discriminated against. They're being profiled.
My final question is this. For those who are not Muslim, have no Islamic connection, who say, this isn't about me, it doesn't affect me, it doesn't matter to me, you say?
You should not fear your Muslim neighbor. This is about you if you fear your Muslim neighbor and are supporting this ban. Muslims are actually less of a threat to your safety and security than the average American, simply by virtue of the fact that they don't drink, and you're at much higher risk of being killed by a drunk driver than by a terrorist act, be it an act committed by a white supremacist or Muslim or whoever. So the fear is unfounded.
And by the way, your connection to this organization, you're a Muslim?
Yes, for 20 years. I wasn't born a Muslim.
Jim Seuss is Executive Director Council on American-Islamic Relations, New Jersey chapter. Thank you, Jim, for joining us on State of Affairs.
Thank you very much.
Stay with us. We're right back after this. Thank you, Jim.
All right, thanks.
New Jersey voters will soon decide who will be New Jersey's next governor after Chris Christie. Now, my job is to ask the candidates the tough questions that you want answered. So follow me on Twitter @SteveAdebato and post the #1 question that you want me to ask New Jersey's next governor. We are joined by State Senator Robert Gordon. Bob Gordon is the majority conference leader. That is in the Democratic Party in the state Senate. How you doing, Senator?
Doing real well.
You know an awful lot about transportation. You know about the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey because you are the chair of the Legislative Oversight Committee and vice chair of the Transportation Committee in the Senate, right?
That's correct.
So I'm going to ask you, for those who are dependent upon the bus terminal over on 42nd Street?
42nd, around 9th. Yeah.
Right. What is going on over there, and is it going to be improved, and how long would it take? Loaded question, I know.
Well, it's a 66-year-old facility.
By the way, I should make it clear that the Port Authority is responsible for that bus terminal.
That's right, which is a bi-state agency. It was built in 1950 for buses that were smaller and not quite as heavy. And so structurally, the slabs that are used for the terminal are actually going to fail at some point. So it has a lifespan that's relatively short. And as anyone who's taken the bus to New York every day knows, it really is, it's a third world facility. People say it's just ruins their day. It's at capacity now. It's hot. It's cold in the winter. It's really just unacceptable for a civilized society, really.
Senator, you make it sound as if the state of affairs of transportation as it relates to those who have to go back and forth between New York and New Jersey, I mean, the mecca, potentially, of this country in terms of commerce, is pretty pathetic.
It is. I mean, the New York and New Jersey region, I think, represents something like 10 or 12% of gross domestic product.
Oh, just that?
And the city of New York is the economic engine for the region. Over the next 10 years, the Regional Plan Association is projecting 300,000 new jobs in Manhattan, but not much housing. That means those jobs are going to be held by people in the suburbs, and they can be New York suburbs or New Jersey suburbs, depending on whether we invest in the infrastructure needed to get people across the river.
But right now, we're not doing that.
That's exactly right. That's the problem.
So the question that needs to be asked is, how serious are those in public policy positions that anticipate or should be anticipating that these demographic changes are taking place? That this is what it is we want, which is that we're competing against other parts of the country. We're competing against others around the world to bring commerce here, to bring jobs here, but we're not doing what is necessary to move people efficiently and effectively so there aren't these log jams over by the Lincoln Tunnel.
You know, and we had a major, probably the most important infrastructure project in the country in the Arc Tunnel that was a project canceled early in the Christie administration to I think so that he could get use of the funds there to use elsewhere and avoid a gas tax.
Well, the governor argued respectfully that where that Arc Tunnel would end was, in terms of where it would wind up in New York City, was not effective and efficient for those who were traveling on it and wasn't the right place. I mean, we can get into the debate about that, but how did that affect commuters?
Well, what it means is because he canceled that project, we're now a couple of decades away against a new, we're two decades away from a new so-called gateway project, which would build new tunnels, which you know, is something we need to really support the New Jersey economy.
But Senator, also the other question is, I'm not here to defend the governor, but he also argued about the funding mechanism. Who should be paying for that? So when you deal with bi-state transportation, right? You've got New York, New Jersey, and the Port Authority is based on a 1921 compact, if you will, between two states, New York and New Jersey, because it is two states. What kind of balance is there and should there be between who pays for what, since you are crossing two states? And does that balance exist today?
Well, in 1921, some wise people recognized that here we have this major metropolitan area, probably the only metropolitan area in the world with a border running down it. And it could not be New York versus New Jersey. We had to think in regional terms. Because what is, you know, the people who are supporting who are coming from New Jersey to New York are supporting the local economy and paying taxes there. So this bi-state compact was established, creating the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And there's always been tension over the 90-plus years between the states. But I think now we're really seeing, I think, a very unproductive situation where you know, we're keeping a ledger sheet. How much are we spending on New York? How much are we spending on New Jersey? The governor of New York wants his projects at LaGuardia and JFK Airport, a train to the plane. We're looking at the Port Authority bus terminal is critical to our future. And the governor,
they think it's a New Jersey project, and how do they benefit? Governor Cuomo doesn't like it.
Yeah, I mean, he said that. And, you know, we respond. It's going to be built by New York labor, and New Jerseyans are going to be paying taxes and spending money in the city.
Before I let you out here, Senator, you are on you're a member, a resource member of the advisory board for the Institute for Gerontology at Felician University. We deal with those folks at the university, talking a lot about issues involving the elderly. What is that entity, and why does it matter so much in terms of public policy? Well,
the Institute of Gerontology was created in 2014, I believe, with the objective of trying to do some research on the nature of aging in America, what the needs of the elderly are, what younger people should be thinking about in terms of their retirement. One of the major objectives is to learn what the needs and reality of aging are, so that the school can better train healthcare professionals. They have a School of Nursing and other healthcare schools, and they want that training program and the people who are doing the teaching to really understand what's out there in the real world. So they've created an advisory committee of people who are actively involved in dealing with the elderly, either people who are with insurance companies or actually providers or elder law specialists.
Or members of the legislature who deal with public
members of the
policy.
legislature. And we just had a conversation about the transportation needs of the elderly. And Out of that meeting, I realized that what we need in the state is something like an Uber for seniors. Because it's such a huge issue for the elderly in a suburban state with limited mass transit.
Senator Bob Gordon is the majority party leader in the Democratic Party. By the way, harmony in Trenton in 2017, this kumbaya moment, you feel it happening down there? Just real quick, a few seconds.
I think that in contrast to Washington, in Trenton, the Republicans and Democrats in the legislature get along very well. It's the governor who sometimes presents it.
Oh, is that the way? You're going to leave it on that note, really?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We're going to have to get the governor.
Maybe that'll change soon.
Well, yeah, we'll see. We'll have all the candidates on to talk about it. Thank you, Senator. That is it for this edition of State of Affairs. Let's continue the conversation. So follow me on Twitter at Steve Adubato. See you next week on State of Affairs. Thank you, Senator. You're going to leave on that note.
Sorry. Listen, I had to leave a little shot there.
That was good. Thank you so much.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Agnes Veris NJTV studio at 2 Gateway. Funding has been provided by Bartley Healthcare, Felician University, the New Jersey Association of Health Underwriters, Wells Fargo, PSE&G, JFK Medical Center, and by Johnson & Johnson.
New Jersey is a leader in solar power, and PSE&G is doing its part. With 24 solar installations in New Jersey, projects that are giving landfills new purpose and turning former brownfields green. Solar powers more than our homes and schools and businesses. It powers our economy by creating jobs right here in the Garden State. PSE&G, proud to support New Jersey.